Hello, and welcome to the Portswigger SQL injection series here on CTF Security. I am your host Olajide, and in this guide, I want to briefly introduce you to one of the most essential tools we will be using in this series, which is the Burp Suite. I will walk you through the essential steps to configure Proxy, install CA certificate, set up a proxy switcher, and how to intercept and manipulate web requests. So without further ado, let's get started. Burp Suite is a security testing tool designed for web application security testing. It is widely used by security professionals and penetration testers to identify vulnerabilities in web applications. Burp Suite includes features for scanning, crawling, and analyzing security of a web application. Burp Suite has the capability to discover issues such as SQL injection, cross-site scripting, and other vulnerabilities by intercepting and manipulating HTTP traffic. Being a proxy application, Burp Suite acts as an intermediary between your web browser and the target web application. When you configure your browser to use Burp Suite as a proxy, it intercepts and analyzes the HTTP request and response exchange between your browser and the web server. And we're going to be seeing how this is done in just a minute. So what we're going to do is to start our application and head to the menu here, and we're going to search for Burp. And you can see the icon right here. I'm going to click on that, and this is going to open the Burp Suite application. Now you can have some pop-up menu here asking you to either update or perform any other action. So you just select your preferences in such situation. I'm just going to click on close, and then here we have option to select temporary project or to select new project on disk. So I'm going to select temporary project and I'll click on next. Now we can use Burp as default, which is exactly what we want to do. And this is just going to take a few seconds to load up the Burp Suite application. Now, this is how the interface of Burp Suite application looks like. And we have a lot of menu here. For example, we are currently on the dashboard. We have the target menu. We have proxy, intruder, repeater, sequencer, decoder, comparer, and other menu that we have in here. Now, to configure Burp for the first time, what we need to do is to fire up our browser. Now, while the browser is loading, we can head to the Burp and let's head to Proxy tab. And if we select options, now we're going to see the configuration for our proxy listener. And currently, we have it set to 127.0.0.1 on port 8080. When you set a proxy in Burp Suite with the address 127.0.0.1, which means localhost, and port 8080, all the HTTP and HTTPS traffic will be routed through Burp Suite, allowing Burp Suite to intercept, analyze, and modify the traffic for the purpose of web security testing and debugging. By default, Burp Suite is usually set to localhost, meaning Burp Suite only listens for connection originating from your local machine. However, you can configure Burp Suite to listen on other IP addresses if you want to make it accessible from other devices on your network. Now let's talk about how we can connect this proxy setting to our web browser. So what we need to do is to head to our web browser, and let me quickly enlarge this. Let's go with maybe 120 or 150 is okay. So what we need to do is go to the settings here. Then let's scroll down to the extreme end here. Now we have a network settings. We're going to click on settings. Then we have options to configure proxy access to internet. We have options for no proxy, auto dictate proxy, use system proxy, and manual proxy. So we're going to opt for manual proxy, and we're going to fill in the 127.0.0.1, and we need to specify the port, which is port 8080. Then we can ensure that it is also selected for the HTTPS traffic, and we can click on OK. Now, if we go back to the Burp Suite application, and let's just go away from here and go to Intercept, and let's make sure the Intercept is on. Now, if we go to our web browser and try to navigate to a web address, let's say we want to visit testphp.vonweb.com, which is an HTTP web application. Now, what happened here is Burp Suite have successfully captured the request, so the request is not able to go to the server. So we have to go to the Burp Suite to perform an action on the request. Now we can see that we are attempting to send a GET request to this specific testphp.vonweb.com, and this is our user agent we're using to send our request with other HTTP headers information. Now we can perform certain action on this request. We can either choose to forward, we can choose to drop the request. Now I'm just going to click on forward, and then if we go back to our browser, you can see that the page have successfully loaded. Now let's test this out on an HTTPS web application. So let's go with google.com, and you can see that we have an error message. Software is preventing Firefox from safely connecting to this site. This is because our browser expects the certificate to be signed by a trusted certificate authority, and since Burp Certificate Authority is not recognized as such, it triggers a security warning. In order to fix this, we need to install the Burp Suite Certificate Authority, and what we are going to do is, let's just go with a new tab. We're going to enter HTTP Burp, and this should take us to an interface where we can download the Burp Certificate Authority. You can also decide to do this in another way. I think 127.0.1 on port 8080. I think this should also bring the same thing. Yeah. So you can either use any of these two methods. So what I'm going to do is, let's make this. We're going to download this certificate authority, and you can see that I have already downloaded it. I have it in my download folder, so I'm going to just cancel this. In your case, you can go ahead and download this file. So after downloading it, you're going to head to the settings. You're just going to search for certificate, and then you click on the view certificate. Now you have to make sure that authorities is selected on your certificate manager. So I'm going to make sure it's selected, and I'm going to click on the import. Then we need to specify the location of our certificate file we just downloaded earlier. So let's select it. It's in the download folder, and we're just going to click on open. And this is asking us, do you want to trust Port Trigger Certificate Authority for the following purposes? The first one is trust this CA to identify website. The second is trust this CA to identify email user. So I'm just going to select both, and I'm going to click on OK, and then we can just click on OK. So let's test this and see if this is working properly now. I'm just going to go to google.com once more, and let's go to Burp Suite, and let's forward this request. So you can see random requests. I'm just going to try to forward everything, and let's go back. Now you can see that the Google web page has successfully loaded. So this is how we can install Certificate Authority on Burp Suite. So let's go back to the Burp Suite application here, and let's turn on our Intercept. Burp Suite provides a controlled environment for security testing, allowing users to inspect and modify HTTP requests. And we're going to see how this works. So let's go back to our application, and let's go to the testphp.vonweb.com. So imagine I send a request by just clicking on any of this link. So let's go with the PHP scanner. Now this request is going to be captured by Burp, and when we head to the Burp, we can see our request. Now we can either choose to modify our request here, or we can send it to another Burp tool, such as the repeater or the intruder. Now let's right click on this and send this to repeater. Now if we send this to repeater, we are able to manipulate this information by changing the request to see how it reacts on the web server. So for example, I might choose to change the get request being sent to a post request and see how the application reacts. So let's forward that. You can see that the application still reacts with 200 OK status code. I might want to change it to put and see if we have any differences in our response. Now you can see that we have 405 status code. So with this method of manipulating requests, an attacker is able to make the application to behave in an unintended manner. Now let's head back to the proxy tab here. And I'm just going to forward this request, make sure I forward everything. And you can now see that we have our web application fully loaded. So this is how we can capture requests, which is intercepting requests, manipulating or changing any aspect of that request, and then forwarding the request to see how the web application is going to react to the changes we just made to the request. So the next feature of Burp Suite we're going to discuss is scope configuration. In Burp Suite, we're able to define the scope of our testing, which means we want to specify which URL and domain are within scope to avoid unintentional testing. Now to do this, we're going to head to the Burp Suite application, make sure we forward all existing requests. Okay, good. So let's go to the target menu. Here you can see that our scope is really messed up with a lot of targets which we do not need in scope. So what we can do in such situation is to go to the item we want to add to scope. We can right click on it and we can click on add to scope. Then you are going to have a pop-up menu saying you have added an item to target scope. Do you want Burp Proxy to stop sending out of scope item to the history or other Burp tool? Answering yes will avoid accumulating project data for out of scope item. So we're going to just click on yes, and then we can also go to this bar right here. We can click on that, then we can select show only in scope item. Then we just need to apply these settings, and now you see that we have just the in scope item located in our sitemap here. You could also revert that changes by going to the bar here, deselect the show only in scope item, and then we click on apply, and this is going to bring back all other out of scope item. You can also do this in a different way by going to the scope menu here. Then we can remove this. Let's just remove what we have existing here. Then you can select the use advanced scope control. Then we click on add. Then we can specify our host or IP range. In this case, I'm just going to use, let's see the name of our host. Not this, not this, not this. What was our host? Let's go back to Burp Suite. Let's cancel this for now. You can just say Von Web, and this is still going to work. So let's go back and say add to scope, depending on your own personal preference. And we're going to use the vonweb.com. It doesn't matter whether you want to capture subdomain or not. So I'm just going to click on OK. And you can see that we've created a scope. So we can go back to the sitemap, and then we can go and filter show only in scope item and apply, and you can still see that we have the test php.vonweb in our in scope item. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the repeater, and I've showcased this earlier when we're talking about intercepting and manipulating requests. The repeater allows you to send repeated requests to a target, making it useful for manual testing and fine-tuning different parameters. Now let's see how we can use this repeater in Burp Suite. We're going to go to the browser and let's see if there's any request we can capture. So let's just go back, and then let's see, we have a certain input feed in here. So let's just put in something, let's say Kali. Let me make this bigger so that we can properly see it. So I'm just going to enter the word Kali here, and then we make sure that our Burp Suite proxy is on. Meanwhile, I need to forward this request. Make sure it is on. Then we'll go back to the web application, then I'm just going to hit the go button. And this is going to be captured by Burp Suite. And you can see that we're sending a post request on the search.php endpoint with test as our parameter. Now the word we are sending is Kali that we can see here. So what we can do is to send this into repeater, and then we can manipulate this query. So let's say I send this, and what is going to be our response? You can see this is just the response we get from the server. We can also try to render this to see the graphical view of the response that we're getting from the server. So this is just going to output search for Kali. Okay, what if we want this application to behave in an unintended way? We want to just manipulate other parts of this request. So let's say I put in get request in here and see, then I change this to, let's say, parrot. Then I send this. So you can see what has happened on the application. We no longer have what we have here initially, which is the search Kali here. I can decide to change this back to post to see how the application reacts. So you can see that we now have search for parrot. You can also choose to delete maybe the user agent. Let's do away with the user agent and see how the application responds to that. So you can see there's not really different in the response. So this is how you can just use the repeater, change request, and then forward and see how the application is able to react. Let's talk about another interesting Burp Suite tool called the intruder. The intruder helps automate attack by forcing input into web application. While the Burp Suite Community Edition has limited features compared to the professional version, you can still use it for basic automated testing. And let's see an example of this. Now let's go back to our web browser and then make sure that Burp Suite Proxy Intercept has been forwarded. And then what we can do is head back to the same browser and try to access maybe something else. Let's zoom in a little bit. Then let's see if we have any feature that allow us to log in with username and password, and then we can click on the sign up. So from the sign up, we can also make this bigger. Now we have a username and a password input field, and we can quickly supply a value here. So I'm just going to use admin, and then I'm going to assume admin also is the password. Before we send this, we're going to head to Burp Suite. We're going to turn on the intercept, and then we can now send our request. Now let's head to Burp Suite. And then we can decide to manipulate this request by sending it to the intruder for automated attack. I'm going to send it to intruder. And then from the intruder, you can see that we have the uname and the pass parameter already filled in and marked in scope. So what we can do is to just leave this the way they are. And then I can decide to change the attack type to cluster bomb. And you can see that each of these attack types has their description appended to it. For example, in the case of the cluster bomb, this attack uses multiple payload sets. There's different payload set for each defined position up to a maximum of 20. The attack iterates through each payload set in turn so that all permutation of payload combinations are tested. So what we can do here is to make sure we select the cluster bomb, and then we go to the payload section to configure our word list that we want to force against this application. So I'm just going to enter some random word list in here. So let's assume we have a username called admin, and we have maybe another username called test user. Let's say user 123 admin 123. Let's say administrator. Let's say root. Let's say Tor. So let's just work with what we have currently, and let's move to the second payload. We can also put in our possible password list. So let's say the same admin, the same password, the same username. Let's say the password is password 1234, or password 123. Let's say test. Let's say user. Let's say users. Okay, cool. So we can just work with what we have now. When you are done entering your payload here, you can just click on the start attack. If you have a word list file like the raw queue file or any other kind of word list, you can also import it by using the load here, which is going to take you to your PC local directory to select the file for automated attack. So I'm just going to close this, and we're going to click on start attack. This is going to pop up a notification telling you that you are using the demo version of the Burp Suite Community Edition. So you can opt for the professional edition by following the link and all sorts of information like that. So let's just click on OK, and our attack is going to start. And you can start monitoring how the request is being sent. For example, you can see that the admin resulted to a 302. For example, let's choose the first request and see how it works. So this was the request being sent, and this is the response from the server. And the response from the server is telling us that you must log in, meaning this is actually a wrong username and password combination. We can also try other ones. Let me just bring this down a little bit. Okay, so we can try to see another request. And what do we have on the response? Still, you must log in. Now you can use the length of this particular request to keep track of changes within the request. You can see all these requests here has 253 length, meaning they are probably the same response from the server, which is you must log in. So let's go to where the length differs. I'm just going to scroll down. I think we have 386 here. So let's see what this is talking about. So this is an error message, which is saying, warning, MySQL connect connection refused. Then we have a specific location on line 2. Website is out of order. Okay, so let's see, do we have any other information, any other interesting information? Password, test. Okay, we have another one, which is the test. That is test as the username and test as the password. And we can try to render this to see how it looks in graphical user interface. Just scroll up a little bit. So you can see that we have successfully logged in as the test user. So this is how we can perform automated attack using the Burp Suite application. Now that we have the valid username and password, which is test for username and test for password, we can go ahead to the request, and then let's scroll down a little bit, and you can see what this request is here. So I can decide to right click on this, or I can just decide to copy the entire request. Let's go to the Burp Suite, and on the Proxy tab, I'm just going to replace the entire request here, and I'm going to forward. Make sure you forward other requests as well. And this is going to obviously log us in as the test user. Can we make the same request? So let's try to make the same request. I think something happened. Let's go back to the Burp. I'm going to replace the entire request with what we have on the intruder, and I'm going to send. Great. And you can see that now we are logged in as the test user. You can see right here, log out test. Now let's head back to Burp Suite and talk about another interesting tool called the comparer. The comparer helps us identify the differences between two pieces of data, such as requests or responses from target application. This helps in pinpointing variation and potential vulnerability within web application. Now, how does this work? Now, if you go to probably the proxy and the HTTP request, you can see that we have a lot of requests that we have sent on this web application. I can decide to filter this to show only in scope. Then I'm going to apply. Then we are going to be having requests from the testphp.vonweb.com only. So we have a request sent to, let's just pick a similar request. Let's pick a similar request. Okay, so I have two requests here. I have one which is the login.php, and I have another request which is userinfo.php. This is a get request and this is a post request. Now, if you want to see if there's any differences between these requests, we can do that using the comparer. And what we're going to do is to right click on the first one, and I'm going to send to comparer. We can either choose to response or to request. In this case, I'm going to use the request. So let's go to the second one, which is the userinfo.php. I'm going to right click and send also to comparer request. Now we can head to comparer, and you're going to see these two requests we just sent to this particular tool. Now what we need to do is we can either compare by words or we can compare by byte. So let's go with the word, and we're going to see the differences between this request. Now we're able to tell the similarities and the differences between these requests. For example, you can see that we have a key here telling us that whenever you see an highlight with this color, we're talking about the part of the request that has been modified. We also have deleted, which is the blue color. We have the yellow color, which is the part that has been added to the request. In this case, you can see that this yellow part here is not present on the initial request here, making it entirely different from this request. We can also see what has been changed, like the get request, like the post request, and the user info information here that has been changed to login here. So this is how we can take a look at the different words within that request and be able to spot the differences. We can also compare by byte. So let's go to byte. And this is just going to show you the X information about these particular two requests that we've sent here, and we can then spot the differences in byte. Now let's talk about another interesting Burp Suite tool called the extender. This tool helps us to add more functionalities to our Burp Suite applications. So you think of it like a plugin that helps add functionalities to the Burp Suite application. To use this extender, what we need to do is to head to the B App Store, and here we are presented with a list of all the available Burp extensions that we have here. And you can scroll through these extensions, but mind you, there are some of the extensions that are not available for Burp Suite Community Edition. So you have to just figure that out by checking out the description by the right corner here. So what we need to do is to click on a particular Burp extension we want to install, and then we're going to scroll down and see if we can download or install that particular extension. You can see in this case, you need to download the Jython and configure its location in Burp extender before we can be able to use this particular tool. So we can also take a look at other tools to see if there's any, or this also need another dependency. This requires Burp Suite Professional. Let's just sort by popularity. I think it is sorted. And here I can just take a look at some of these extensions here to see if there's any. Okay, great. So you can see that you can install this particular Burp extension on the community edition here. So we're not going to be installing any extension, but feel free to research on any extension that could be of help to you and install it using the extender tool on the Burp Suite application. This takes us to the last tool we're going to discuss in this video, which is the logger. By default, the logger displays traffic generated by all the tools in Burp Suite. This includes modified requests and requests sent by extensions. Now you might be wondering, what is the difference between the request history of this logger and the one generated by the HTTP history? The HTTP history only displays traffic from a web browser that is proxied through a Burp. So if you go back to the logger here, you can have access to every history of requests that you've sent, including the ones being sent by your Burp extensions. Now, before we wrap up this video, let's see how we can quickly set up a proxy switcher called the Foxy proxy. In order to do this, what we need to do is head to our browser And then let's just make sure that we have our intercept turned off. Let's go to proxy, let's go to intercept, and let's just turn this off. Now let's go back to the browser. I'm going to search for the term Foxy proxy. And since I'm using Firefox here, I can just add Firefox. And then we can make this kind of a little bit bigger. So we're going with the first link, which says Foxy proxy standard. And once this opens, what we need to do is to add this Foxy proxy to our Firefox extension. And this is just going to take few seconds to install. I'm going to click on add. And now you can see that the Foxy proxy has been installed on our Firefox web browser. Okay, we're going to click on OK. And we can access our Foxy proxy here. So let's just close this and open a new tab. And we can go to the Foxy proxy here. We're going to click on the option to set up the proxy. And from here, we're going to move to the proxies tab and we're going to click on add. Then we can give our proxy a name. So let's call it Burp Suite. Then we can set the host name. Remember, we're using 127.0.0.1. And then we're using port 8080. And then I can just save this. So I believe this has been saved successfully. Then let's just close this and see what we have here. You can now see that we have Burp Suite here. Now you might be wondering, what is the use of this Foxy proxy? The Foxy proxy easily allows us to switch between different proxy within our web browser. So instead of having to go to your settings all the time, go to settings, scroll down to network settings, having to come to settings here, then having to switch to manual or impute the HTTP proxy 127.0.0.1 and port 8080 all the time. So we can just do this easily by using the Foxy proxy. Even without coming back to this setting to either turn off the proxy or turn it on, we can easily control it. And let's see how this works. So I'm going to switch this to no proxy, which means that Burp Suite is not going to work when we try to execute this without the Foxy proxy. So I'm going to click on OK, and then let's switch. Currently now it is disabled. So let's enable the Burp Suite, and then we can now try to send a request. So let's load the test.vonweb.com. So I'm going to go to Burp Suite, ensure that intercept is on. Let's just forward all this one. So let's go back, and then we're going to load the web page, which is the test.php.vonweb.com. And you can see that Burp Suite have successfully captured the request. So I'm going to just forward it. So whenever we want to stop using Burp Suite, we can just go to this extension here and just disable the proxy. And then when we try to visit a page, so let's say we reload the same page, you can see that we open this web application without having to intercept it with the Burp Suite application. So this tool is meant to make our life easy whenever we had to switch between our normal proxy and the Burp Suite application proxy. So guys, that'll be all in this video. Please make sure you like, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you in the next video.